and I thought you was going to help with nursery. Could have. You could. All right, today we're in our third week of this new series called Wonderful Women in the Bible. And in this 13-week long series, we are looking at some of the wonderful women in the Bible that God used in a specific time, a specific place, and specific purpose. Today we get to look at one of my favorite stories that from when I grew up as a child. We looked at today at a woman named Jochebed, and I know Ted said that when Roger was here, he said if he had a daughter, he was going to name her Jochebed, but he never had one. But we're going to get to look at that today. And we started off in week 1 looking at Eve. So Eve was the woman who started it all. And although her claim to fame, although she's known, not fame I guess, but although she's known as the first person to sin, God still used Eve to start the family, to bring marriage into the world, and to start a line with Adam that would eventually lead to Jesus. In week 2, last week, we looked at Sarah, the mother of nations. Sarah was the wife of Abraham. And God promised Abraham and Sarah a son. And at an age well past the age of childbearing, God gave them and delivered with that promised son named Isaac. Isaac's sons would be Jacob and Esau, and Jacob's sons would become what we know as the 12 tribes of Israel. And so today we pick up, as I said, in this next with the next person of our wonderful women, and we're going to look at, I said, as one of my favorite Bible stories when I was growing up as a child. Today we look at Jochebed, the mother of Moses. She played a very important role in Scripture, yet we know so little about this woman. We don't hear the name Jochebed much in church, and it's understandable. It's a name you like to say, Jochebed. But her name is only mentioned 2 times in the entire Bible. The Bible speaks of her more than 2 times, but her name is only mentioned twice. And those names, they're mentioned in just passing. The first place we see her name mentioned is in Exodus 6:20, where we read this. Amram married his father's sister Jochebed, and she bore him Aaron and Moses. The other place that we see the name Jochebed comes in Numbers chapter 26. This is a chapter with a long list of names. And in the 59th verse, we see that Jochebed also had a daughter. There we read this. The name of Amram's wife was Jochebed, the daughter of Levi, who was born to Levi in Egypt. And she bore to Amram Aaron and Moses and their sister Miriam. Miriam is listed last there among the children, but she is actually the oldest of the 3. And so at this time, when Jochebed gave birth to Moses, the Israelites are slaves in Egypt. And so when she gives birth to Moses, Miriam is about 10 years old and Aaron is about 3 years old. In the first chapter of Exodus, we read all about what type of environment they were having to live in while they were in Egypt. As slaves in Egypt, they were a very oppressed people, the Israelites were. A new king, you could say a Pharaoh, a new king had come into power, one who did not know about Joseph or hear about Joseph, and we read about Joseph in Genesis. Joseph was loved by the people in Egypt. He saved the people in Egypt. And so as this new king comes along, he saw that the Israelites had become too numerous for these Egyptians. So he came up with a plan, an idea to deal with these Israelites. He put slave masters over the Israelites to oppress them with forced labor, but somehow the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied. So this king comes up then with a new plan. And he told the Hebrew midwives, he said, when you go to help the Israelite women give birth, if you see that it's a boy, then you are to kill the boy. The Bible tells us, though, that the Hebrew midwives feared God. And instead of killing the boys, they let them live. Well, then, since that didn't work, the king then gives an order that to all people, that every boy that is born must be thrown into the Nile River. But every girl could live. And so that's where we find ourselves today with this story of Jochebed. The second chapter of Exodus opens up in that setting that I just mentioned. And in the first 10 verses, we can read about what Jochebed does here. It says this: Now a man from the house of Levi went and married a daughter of Levi. The woman conceived and bore a son. And when she saw that he was beautiful, she hid him for 3 months. But when she could hide him no longer, she got him a whisker basket and covered it over with tar and pitch. Then she put the child into it and set it among the reeds by the bank of the Nile. His sister stood at a distance to find out what would happen to him. The daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the Nile, with her maidens walking alongside the Nile. And she saw the basket among the reeds and sent her maid. And she brought it to her. When she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the boy was crying. And she had pity on him and said, This is one of the Hebrews' children. Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, Shall I go and call a nurse for you from the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for you? Pharaoh's daughter said to her, Go ahead. So the girl went and called the child's mother. Then Pharaoh's daughter said to her, Take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages. So the woman took the child and nursed him. The child grew, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And she named him Moses and said, Because I drew him out of the water. So I want you here to just kind of imagine the suspense here as Jochebed carries this child. You know, we in our day and time, we can easily find out what the sex of a baby is well before the child is born. Obviously, they were not able to do that at this time. And maybe you've asked someone who is about to have a child or who is going to have a child if they want a boy or a girl, and maybe they answered it and said, We really don't care. We just hope to have a healthy baby. Well, these Israelite women, during that time with Jochebed, they were very concerned with what the sex of their baby was going to be. Because if it was a boy, it was supposed to be killed. If it was a girl, they could let it live. And so this is the stressful situation that Jochebed found herself in while she was carrying Moses. So imagine the suspense that she must have had. Was it a boy or a girl for all this time? Because if it was a boy, he knew that he could be taken from her and thrown into the Nile River, where no doubt he would be eaten by crocodiles. The Nile River was a river that had many crocodiles in it, and many of the Egyptians actually saw the crocodiles as a god. And so how devastating would it be if you carried a child for that long? You gave birth to that child. You're excited. Then you see that it's a son, and someone takes it from you and throws it in the river to die. That's how stressful it was. That's how the lifestyle was for these Israelite women who were slaves. In America, we have people who fight for the right to kill their children. And here that we had a nation of people, the Israelites there, who would have done anything to keep their children alive. And that's exactly what Jochebed was facing here in this second chapter of Exodus. See, in this story, you maybe heard this story as a child, growing up in Sunday school at church or in vacation Bible school. But usually the focus tends to lean towards Moses, because he is the main figure in those early parts of the Bible, especially from Exodus through the next 4 books. For Jochebed to be the mother that she wanted to be here, though, to be the example she wanted to be, she was going to have to be a woman of courage. And so look at what she did there in those first 3 verses that I read. She gets married, she becomes pregnant, and she gives birth to a son. Now the Bible tells us that when she saw that it was a fine child or a beautiful child, she hid him for 3 months. Moses was no ordinary child here. We even read in Acts chapter 7 that Moses was not an ordinary child. Jochebed, though, she knew she was breaking the law by keeping Moses alive. She knew the risks that were involved by doing what she was doing. She understood that her and her whole family could be executed by the authorities for refusing to obey this order. See, these people, the Israelites, they were nothing but dirty, filthy slaves in the eyes of the Egyptians, in the eyes of Pharaoh, in the eyes of all of them. They had no value to anyone outside of their slave work. But Jochebed always knew that there was a higher law than the law of Pharaoh. Even if the government of Egypt had a low view on the life of the Israelites, Jochebed didn't. She honored life. She honored God. It came down to their heritage. They were Levites. And it came down to the Word of God. And they understood, they knew the promises that God had given to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob now some 400 years earlier. And when most Israelite women here at this time were keeping their mouths shut for fear, and they were giving their babies up, if it was a boy, to be thrown into the Nile, Jochebed had the courage to say no. It takes courage to do something, especially when you are the only one who seems willing to do it. You know, you may know of many mothers who have had the courage to stand up for their children in some way, in some setting. Maybe you've had a time as a mother. Maybe you know someone who's had a time as a mother who had to stand up for their children or for someone, to stand up to someone for the sake of her children. One thing they say you don't do is get between a mother and her children. A mother hates to see her children treated badly. And if she sees it, she will do something about it. Even if she is the only one willing to say or do something about it. There was a test conducted years ago at a university between 10 students who were placed in a room. And there were 3 lines of different lengths drawn on a card. The students were told to raise their hand when the instructor pointed to the longest line. But 9 of the students were told beforehand to raise their hand when the instructor pointed to the second longest line. The usual reaction was that one other student would put his hand up when the instructor pointed to the longest line. Then he would look around and see that he was the only one with his hand up, and he would put it back down quickly. This happened 75% of the time from people who were in grade school all the way up through high school in this study. It takes a lot of courage to stand up for something if you are the only one, even if you know it's right. And that's the position really Jochebed was in here. So she took her son and hides him for 3 months. When she can't hide him any longer, she puts him in a basket, coats it with tar and pitch, and places her son in that basket, in among the reeds along the bank of the Nile. That alone took a lot of courage. Because, as I said, the Nile was a river that was flowing with crocodiles. She was taking a risk just in doing that. And even though it could have cost her her life and the lives of her whole family, she had the courage to do that which was right. Jochebed was a woman who showed us a lot of courage. But when you look at verses 4 through 8 that we read earlier, we see also that Jochebed was a woman of wisdom. Wisdom is something that you could say is maybe lacking in our day and time. Jochebed was nobody's fool here, though. She took that basket, coated it with tar and pitch. Then we see the wisdom that she had in the next few verses. In verses 4 through 8, we read about how Miriam, Moses' sister, was standing at a distance to see what would happen with Moses. She was there to see what would happen to this basket. And if someone picked it up, she would see who it was. As she's standing there watching, the Bible tells us that Pharaoh's daughter came down to the Nile to bathe. She was there with her attendants, with her maidens, and as they were there, they spotted the basket floating among the reeds. And as they opened this basket, they saw a baby, and they knew that it was one of the Hebrew babies immediately. And when that happened, Miriam, Moses' sister, comes out and asks Pharaoh's daughter if she wanted her to go get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for her. Pharaoh's daughter agrees to this, and Miriam goes on her way and does it. And I think throughout this section we can see the wisdom of Jochebed. Because I think this was part of the plan she had. Miriam was not there playing in the water. She wasn't there just peeking out to be curious. Miriam was standing there at a distance, because she was really on guard to see what would happen and who would find the basket. And I don't think it was a coincidence that they placed the basket where Pharaoh's daughter would come to bathe at the Nile. That was not her first time, I'm sure, bathing at this location. I think this was well planned. It's also not likely that a 10-year-old girl would even know what to say or how to talk to a princess. Most girls in that situation, especially a slave girl, would be terrified, afraid to even speak to a princess. You know, it's more likely that she had been coached by her mother, Jochebed, or taught what to say in this case. You see, Miriam wasn't just standing around there, around this bathing spot of the princess, offering free nurses to baby boys floating in the river. This was not a common occurrence. I think Jochebed used her wisdom here throughout all of this. She was protecting her child. A wise mother, a wise woman will protect their children. See, our children, we have to protect them from a lot of different things in our world for sure. You know, are our children protected from what they watch on television or what they see on the internet or on their phones? What kind of games do our children play? What kind of TV shows or movies do they watch? Wisdom is something that is necessary if someone is going to be a godly person. In 1 Kings, God asked Solomon, told Solomon he could ask for one thing, anything that he could ask for. Solomon asked for wisdom. He could have asked for long life. He could have asked for wealth. He could have asked for the death of his enemies. But he asked for wisdom. He asked for wisdom not so that he could just be more intelligent than all the other people around him, but that he could know the difference between right and wrong. As the king, he wanted to be able to judge right and judge fairly. He wanted to be able to, for these difficult decisions to become easy to him. And Jochebed, as well, she understood the importance of having wisdom. And she used her wisdom to help protect her child just like she had used courage. But when you read the last two verses of this passage, as we read earlier, we also see that Jochebed was a woman of faith. To me, she had faith throughout this whole process that we read in those 10 verses. From the moment that she was pregnant to the moment that she had her son, she was trusting, I believe, that God would take care of the situation. You see, being a Levite, from the clan of Levi, they were no doubt religious Jewish people. And Jochebed shows her faith here in this passage. She saw her son, that he was a fine boy, that he was a beautiful boy. And she hides him for 3 months. Then she has the faith to put her son in that basket, coat it with tar and pitch, and place that basket in a river with crocodiles. In verses 9 and 10, though, I think we see faith shown in an even different way by her. Pharaoh's daughter told her to take the baby and nurse him for her. Not only that, she's even told by Pharaoh's daughter that she will pay her wages. Jochebed here was going to be paid for taking care of her own baby. So she takes her son and she nurses him. Now, we don't know how long Jochebed had Moses. The Bible does tell us that as the child grew up, she took him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son at that time. Now, where do you think Moses and Aaron and Miriam, these siblings, where do you think they got their training, their understanding of the teachings of God? I can guarantee you it did not come from the court of Pharaoh. Moses was not going to learn about the one true living God while there with Pharaoh and his daughter. So it had to have happened early in life. It had to have happened during that time that Jochebed took care of him until she took him to Pharaoh's daughter. See, Jochebed and Amram, they taught their children the right ways. They trained them in the ways they should live. They made known to them their heritage as Jewish people, as Hebrews, as Israelites. They made known to them their faith in God and what they should believe. And Moses had learned I'm sure at this time already of the major role that God had played in the lives of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the promises that had been made that they would be a numerous people, that he would give them the land of Canaan. And it all started when they were children, just like it should. You know, we can learn a lot about the Bible, we can learn a lot about God here in church in a setting like this, and it's very important. But it's not only the responsibility of the church in this setting to teach our young people the ways of God. See, our churches over the years have placed the responsibility on Sunday school teachers, vacation Bible school teachers, youth ministers, preachers, and while those are great things, we have placed a lot of responsibility on them, and I just don't think it happens as much in the home as it used to. But it's our responsibility as adults to make sure that our children are getting their learnings, their understandings of God's ways at a young age, at home too. And I know many of you do that. See, our young people need to see us reading our Bibles. They need to see us praying. They need to know that on Sunday mornings we're going to church and that's it. It's as simple as that. As the proverb says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old he will not turn from it. You know, seeing our parents read our Bible, seeing our parents pray has a bigger impact than many will realize. And when you get to Jochebed, she was a mother who had strong faith. Now, where does our faith come from? The Bible tells us this in Romans 10:17. So faith comes from hearing, and hearing by the word of Christ. See, the faith that we should be growing from, the faith that should be growing in us comes from hearing the message, hearing the word of Christ. Now, it's important that our young people hear it in church, and it's important that they see that faith and they hear this message and word of Christ from us as individuals, even at home, not just in the church. But going to church and hearing it is very important. In Hebrews chapter 10, verses 24 and 25, he wrote this about us meeting together. He said, and let us consider how to stimulate one another to love and good deeds, not forsaking our own assembling together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. The writer of Hebrews here, he understood the importance of meeting together. See, obviously they had a problem with some people not. He talks about how they should not be forsaking our own assembling together, as is the habit of some. Obviously, some people had made a habit of just not coming, not meeting together with them. And part of the reason they came to meet together was to stimulate one another to love and good deeds and to encourage one another. Now, why do you think so many young people in our day and time today, especially after they leave the home, drop out of church or stop attending church? I really believe it has to do with the fact that they're not seeing it modeled in their homes growing up. You know, it's many young people, I think they see church as not important because their parents may not show them how important it is. It's extremely important that our young people see from us the importance of being in church, the importance of us reading our Bibles, the importance of us praying and doing the best we can to live a Christ-like life. So let's make it our top priority with our young people to model for our children a love for the Word of God. See, Jochebed was a woman who had faith in God. And with this faith, she raised up her children to honor God. Now, even though Jochebed was only talked about a few short times in the Bible, it's clear from what we read about her that she was a woman who put her trust in God. All three of her children were faithful. Miriam was a prophetess for the Israelites. And after the Israelites crossed the Red Sea on dry ground, it was then that Moses and Miriam, they led all of the Israelites in a hymn, a song celebrating God. Aaron was a priest for the Israelites. He was the one that Moses took with him to speak to Pharaoh when he was to get Pharaoh to let the Israelites go, because Moses said he's not a great speaker. And Moses Moses was God's chosen leader for the Israelites out of slavery. Moses was the one that God specifically chose for that job. If Jochebed had not saved Moses, Moses would never have led the Israelites out of slavery. If Jochebed had not saved Moses, Moses never would have received the Ten Commandments. Moses would not have been the one who wrote the first 5 books of the Bible. It was all a part of God's plan. See, everything Jochebed did in life there with Moses, it was done in love for her son. From the time she placed him in a basket and nursed him and reared him, Jochebed shows us in one short passage what it means to be a woman of courage, a woman of wisdom, and a woman of faith. She truly is one of the wonderful women in the Bible. I want to thank you for joining us here this morning. As we go through this series, a lot of my hope is that as we look at these women, we even learn something new about them. And even for some of them, we even learn to think of them or see them in a different light. As I've said before early on in this series, women were not as prominent as men. They weren't seen as important as men. But we see in this wonderful women in the Bible series that women were very important, and God placed them in certain roles, specific times, specific places to get certain things done. And we're thankful for that. So I want to thank you for joining us here. Next week we'll be looking at Rahab, another woman who would not be considered to be, when you first see her on the scene anyway, it's not a woman you would think would be in a series like this, Wonderful Women in the Bible. But as you know the story of Rahab, she certainly deserves to be in there. If you've never given your life to Jesus Christ, if you've never put your faith in Him, if you've never trusted Him, made Him Lord of your life and confessed Him, or repented and been baptized, been immersed in the waters of baptism, reach out to us and let's make that happen for you so we can get on the right track so you can have that hope of eternal life. As we finish up here today, we are going to stand and sing our hymn of invitation, the first and last verses of song number 333, Footsteps of Jesus.